Mm-hmm.
And welcome. We're continuing our major themes of the Bible. And we're going to start tonight with a video from the Bible Project.
Mm.
Hannah, you'll be able to watch it too. There we go.
We are walking through the story of the Bible, focusing on the role of priests,
And that story begins with God creating a garden called Eden.
where heaven and earth are one.
And God places humans in the garden to be his royal image, his priests, so that humans and God can work together as one. And this whole setup is called God's blessing.
But tragically, the priestly humans are duped into rebelling against God and then exiled from the garden.
But God promises that one day a descendant will come to defeat that evil deceiver and restore humanity as royal priests. And we learn he'll be both a priest and a sacrifice.
But as it stands, humanity is outside of Eden, and things have spiraled into chaotic violence.
But God chooses from the wreckage a couple, Abraham and Sarah. And God calls them to journey to the land of Canaan, and he promises to give them a huge family and all the blessings of Eden.
Now, the blessing isn't just for them. The goal is that God's blessing flows through their family out to all the nations.
And so that makes Abraham's family like a priesthood.
So is Abraham that royal priest we've been hoping for?
Well, no. But Abraham does meet a mysterious figure who reminds us of that promised royal priest.
And who is this?
Well, Abraham is returning victorious from a risky battle, and he passes by the city of Shalem, and this king comes out to meet him. And we're told that this king is also a priest who serves the same God that Abraham does.
Ah, yes, Melchizedek. This man's a mystery. We don't know why he worships Abraham's God. We don't even know his family lineage.
Exactly. But here's what happens. Melchizedek brings this great feast out to Abraham and his army, and then he gives God's blessing to Abraham, saying God is the one who gave him this victory over his enemies. Then Abraham gives Melchizedek 1/10 of everything that he has, and that's the story.
So, what is it all about?
Well, Melchizedek is the king and the priest of Shalem, which is an ancient name short for Jerusalem.
Ah, Jerusalem, which will later become the capital of Abraham's future family, where the temple is built. And that 10% that Abraham gives Melchizedek, that's just like the 10% Israelites will later give to honor the priests who work in the temple.
Exactly. And so here is Abraham, the father of the Israelites, and he's honoring a royal priesthood that existed long before Israel's temple or their priests.
Ah, Melchizedek.
Yeah, he's super important, and we'll come back to him when we get to the story of David.
Okay, back to Abraham. We find out that he and Sarah are unable to have kids. And they're really old, so how are they going to have a family?
Well, they scheme up their own plan. Sarah forces her Egyptian slave to produce a child with Abraham. But once that happens, Sarah ends up despising her slave and oppressing her.
So instead of trusting God for a family, they do it on their own terms.
Right. And so God eventually does give them their own son, Isaac, but then God promptly asks for the life of that son back.
Abraham is called to offer up Isaac on a mountain as a sacrifice.
And we're told this is a test. God's requiring Abraham to own up to his failures, to stop his scheming, and to surrender his family's future to God.
Abraham and Isaac go up the mountain, build an altar, and right as Abraham is about to offer up his son,
God stops him, and he provides a substitute ram that can be sacrificed in Isaac's place. And here, the narrator stops the story and starts speaking to you, the reader, saying, "This is why we today say, on the mountain of Yahweh, it will be provided."
the mountain of Yahweh, that's Jerusalem.
That's right. And so notice, in both of these stories we've looked at, Abraham is near that high place that will later be called Jerusalem.
In the first story, Abraham meets a royal priest, and in the second story, God provides a substitute sacrifice that covers for the sins of Abraham's family.
Yes, and both of these stories point forward to the need for a future royal priest who will also become a sacrifice for the sins of Abraham and his family.
From here, Abraham's family grows to become an entire people. But they eventually end up as slaves in Egypt. And so, how can a group of slaves produce a royal priest?
Exactly. And so that brings us to Moses, whose story we're going to look at next.
So we're looking at royal priesthoods as like a theme that kind of continues throughout. And we're going to use this to look at some of the major people within the Bible, kind of pushing us forward. Any thoughts on the video from tonight? Questions that came up? I'm sure there were maybe more questions than answers sometimes. Or thoughts?
I think he kind of made it real light about, usually you hear that, oh, people really goofed up. And he said something like, oh, and then the humans were what, schemed against or tricked?
They were scheming?
No, that they got tricked.
Oh,
Oh,
I was kind of
in
like,
the garden.
oh,
oh, in the garden.
Oh, in the
we're
garden.
not blaming the humans.
Oh, I thought you meant later
Mhm.
with Sarah. I'm like, she was.
Well, I found it a little puzzling because we're talking about a deeply a society that was based solely on men being the decision makers. And it just surprised me that Abraham would give in so quickly to Sarah's request to send Hagar away. Because he could just as easily have said, Sarah, you be quiet, she stays. Period. There would be no argument. So I found that a little questionable, that he would give in so quickly to her demand.
Yeah, it kind of, I think that's a really good point. I wonder if sometimes we read certain types of matriarchy or patriarchy into our readings, and maybe it wasn't as patriarchal as we read into it.
Ah, okay.
We did have the agency and the power to say
Maybe
what
their
was,
relationship.
or maybe it was just their relationship. Maybe it was cultural, maybe it was
Mhm.
relationship. We don't know.
I don't think you could say it was cultural, because when he decided to get up and move, nobody had the ability to say no. They all went with him. So it would have to be a relationship, or that he just had a soft heart for Sarah, because I don't think he thought it was fair that Hagar should be sent off either.
Well, to a certain
Where
extent,
was his conscience? He knew they were going to die.
rest in the promise, like
Mhm.
having the child. with him.
Right, that's where they were.
So there
scheming.
could be some, maybe he had some guilt that I didn't trust the Lord.
Yeah.
Then you take the problem, you get rid of it.
Yeah,
Hagar had to pay for it.
I know.
And her son.
Yeah, although it does say that Hagar was Sarai's servant or
Mhm.
slave.
Yes.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Mhm.
So then Abraham would not have had the final word necessarily on.
Oh, I see.
Because it
Well, he
wasn't
didn't have
Abraham.
any trouble. He didn't have any trouble impregnating Hagar. I mean, he could have said no.
But Hagar couldn't say no.
But
No.
she couldn't say no. And
No,
that's
she couldn't say no. No, she
Yep.
couldn't say no. But he could have. I mean, he's the leader of the entire tribe.
He wanted
See, I keep coming back to question marks.
yeah.
Interesting how they called Melchizedek mysterious. I never thought of it that way. But We don't know a lot
We
about it.
don't
'cause,
know.
Yeah, you know,
But I've
no
never
lineage
knew-
like they always.
But
put
they
on
always
everything,
just, you always read it, the priest Melchizedek. I just haven't thought about it very much. But it's true, we don't know that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, considered one of the first like official priests. We have no idea why.
I'm guessing
Or,
he
like-
he had a lot of charisma maybe when they were showing, to be, just one of those people. Besides his
Mhm.
station, which he was a king or whatever,
Mm-hmm.
for everyone to respect him so
Mhm.
much.
And I wonder what happened. So, because Christianity, Judaism, like there's like Father Abraham, that Abraham began this, but Melchizedek was the one who gave the blessing.
Right, but he's not
So,
well known.
and was the one who was following God before Abraham was.
Yeah. Yes. We never talked about that. Okay.
And then where did that whole kingdom go?
Oh, yeah. So,
What happened with that whole culture?
Because eventually it had to be either taken over or something, because
yeah.
David attacked Jerusalem, that was Salem,
Yeah.
and captured it.
So
Solomon.
was David attacking God's own people?
We hope
Maybe
not.
by then it was just a little faction or something.
Or they.
Maybe they-
Or they weren't followers
Any
God anymore?
more. Yeah, that's possible. Yeah.
It is mystery.
We'll never know until they develop time travel. Somebody goes back and finds out.
There might be a lot of rewriting.
There- Yeah.
So
Might be a lot of throw it out the window and start over again.
So historically, we don't know much, and we've got a lot of questions. How about from a literary perspective? What role would Melchizedek play in the scriptures? Or what's his importance?
Well, if you split it up between what happens as a community with that type of social and justice system, and then Melchizedek is going to come in and take care of the spiritual side of things and direct the people how to improve their lives spiritually. I see the division very clearly. I mean, he has the title of priest and a highly respected priest.
He seems to be the first person called a priest. That's following
Mhm.
Abraham.
Yeah.
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 Then we have the priests, there'll be priests for other Baal priests, something like that priest. But
Oh,
this
sure.
is the first
Mhm.
time it's actually someone called a priest.
Right.
In this Jewish
Yeah.
religion thing.
So, and as they showed in the video, it's kind of pointed out as it's like setting up what the role of a priest is
Yeah.
within the society.
The
Just
10% and the blessing.
yeah,
And the
To say,
giving
look,
back of
the priests go back to when Abraham began.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. Was it later written in?
Yeah, that's possible. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Do you think about Melchizedek very often? Or when does it
No.
come up? Like,
Comes up in scripture when you're reading it.
Mm-hmm. When Jesus is compared to Melchizedek in the not in the not in his genealogy, but he was compared to that priest-like figure.
yeah, I think that's in Hebrews.
The line of
Hebrews,
Melchizedek or something.
Hebrews
Mhm.
7.
7-Eleven.
Oh, you got a
Yeah.
One
One of those things.
kind of an index, a name
Let's
index.
look at it. Hebrews chapter 7.
I have to get up to get a Bible. I ain't getting up.
Right?
Oh, yeah, it's right. in
We can read
ruler of
aloud. You don't
Solomon.
have to be
Have one
one
of your
to read.
cats bring you one.
Yeah.
Hey, kitty. You have to work on that training.
Yep, have to work on their training.
Ruler of Salem or Salem. Is that how Salem, Massachusetts? Okay.
Well, would anybody be up for starting to read? We'll just read it 7, starting at 1.
I can do it.
Okay.
Recall that Melchizedek, ruler of Salem, priest of the Most High God, went to meet Abraham, who was on his way back after the slaughter of the rulers, and blessed him. And also that it was to Melchizedek that Abraham gave a tenth of all that he had. Melchizedek, which means ruler of righteousness, was also ruler of Salem, that is, ruler of peace. With no mother, no father, no genealogy, no beginning of days or end of life, Melchizedek is like God's only begotten and remains a priest forever as well. Melchizedek's like God.
Wow. So
Okay.
yeah, so pausing there, there's a lot right there. So Melchizedek, priest and king, and so priests and kings, and this in Hebrews resembling the Son of God, and so God is being conveyed through the role of priest, through the role of kings. There's a third way that God's often revealed in the scriptures. Does anybody know what same type of role, a role? Any ideas? There's a whole
What were the first?
priest, king, or ruler.
Okay.
Who else also often speaks or reveals words of God?
Prophet.
Prophets.
Oh, prophet.
Yeah. So priests, kings, and prophets.
Mm.
It's kind of, if we did a Venn diagram
Mhm.
through for the Bible, they would all be related with one another. So Melchizedek, we don't have him as a prophet here necessarily, but priest and king.
Higher than.
Yeah.
What is your verse 4? My verse 4 is try to fathom how great this person was.
Just think how great he was.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Even the patriarch Abraham gave him a tenth of the plunder.
Oh, mine says treasure. Yes.
Sounds like a
That was chapter 1, verse 4.
7.
chapter
Seven.
7, verse 4.
Interesting.
And so Melchizedek, he's the king of righteousness and the king of peace. Where else do we hear this? I mean, we're coming up on Advent
Jesus.
for Jesus.
Jesus,
Yeah.
Jesus, Jesus.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Is that
Isaiah as well. Without father or mother, without genealogy, without beginning of days or end of life, he
Jeez.
remains a priest forever. So what's important about priests from this sentence here?
They have no beginning. They're like eternal.
It doesn't matter where you come from. It matters like the work
Oh.
you're doing then.
Well, that's a good interpretation.
Kind of. Yeah.
Okay.
All
That-
right.
Just
Mhm.
think how great he was. All right, who wants to continue after Abraham gave a tenth of the plunder or treasure?
And you said that was chapter 7?
Yeah,
Hebrews
Now it's in verse
chapter
5.
7, verse 5.
John has
Okay.
it. Verse 5.
Oh, 5. Now the law requires descendants of Levi who became priests to collect a tenth from the people, that is, from their fellow Israelites, even though they are also descended from Abraham. This man, however, did not trace his descendants from Levi, yet he collected a tenth from Abraham and blessed him who had the promises. And without doubt, the lesser is blessed by the greater. In the one case, the tenth is collected by people who die, but in the other case, by him who is declared to be living. One might even say that Levi, who collects the tenth, paid the tenth to Abraham, because when Melchizedek met Abraham, Levi was still in the body of his ancestor.
So we are seeing here there the author is weaving together all of the history, the prophets, the Levites, all of the priestly history woven through Abraham to Melchizedek here, including the practice of giving a tenth of tithing. That's going back. And another piece that's tied with this is that tithing, this giving a tenth, it's not just about like giving of the tenth, but it is also tied with blessing, of the receipt of a blessing as well. And I don't think we can separate those two. I think sometimes I think we do that. We don't always think of our money in ways of gratitude, or our possessions in ways of gratitude, but scriptures really tries to tie those things together, that
Mhm,
all that it's in blessings and gratitude.
mhm.
Anything else others heard in here? All right, let's get to the exciting part. We got
Oh.
Jesus and Melchizedek compared now.
Yes.
So we're moving all the way through
Yes,
history,
we
thousands
are.
of years.
All the way to Jesus.
So verse 11, anybody want to start there?
I can go ahead.
All
It
right.
was on the basis of the Levitical priesthood that the law was given to the people of Israel. Now, if the work of the Levitical priests had been perfect, there would have been no need for a different kind of priest to appear, one who is the successor of Melchizedek, not of Aaron. For when the priesthood is changed, there also has to be a change in the law. And our Lord, of whom these things are said, belonged to a different tribe, and no member of his tribe ever served as a priest. It is well known that he was born a member of the tribe of Judah, and Moses did not mention this tribe when he spoke of priests.
So we're getting into here a little bit. Well, Melchizedek, no father, no mother, like no genealogy here. But it's a priest for all times. But then, hey, what does that mean for us? We all have, like, where do we come from? Where do we all fit in on this?
Tribe that Moses didn't even mention.
Yeah, this tribe Moses did not mention. And no one from that tribe ever served at the altar.
No one from that tribe ever served what?
At
At
the
the
altar. That's what 13 says.
Well, it seems like they're kind of saying like your genealogy doesn't matter as much, but a lot of the New Testament makes it sound like it matters. Okay. With
Yeah.
the lines of
By
people
the
and Jesus.
power of life that cannot be destroyed.
I got almost the same thing, the basis of the power of an indestructible life.
Yeah. Yeah, indestructible life.
Yeah. Genealogy is an interesting thing in the New Testament,
Yeah.
because we begin the Gospels with this genealogy that's happening, and everybody skips over reading it, but it's super important. We have all of these genealogy, and it really grounds what's happening in this genealogy. But then we have Jesus in his hometown, and they're like, "Hey, Jesus, your mom and siblings are at the door." And he's like, "Who's my mother?
Right.
Who's my siblings? Like, I have like those who follow me. Those are my mother, and those are my siblings."
Yeah.
And then goes on and tells people in the letters, like, you are inheriting this. You inherit this kingdom. So there's this concept of genealogy being important going back through the generations, but it's also this like breaking open of genealogy as well, and saying, that doesn't necessarily matter as much as the genealogy that you live into. But I think that's where it creates the confusion, because genealogy is used in multiple ways.
It was in this culture, it was almost everything, your bloodline, I mean, your status in life, and in your occupation and all that.
Yeah, you knew who your tribe was.
Yeah. If you were the
No
priestly
hesitation.
tribe, or if you, whatever, carpenter.
But you could be adopted too.
You could, that's true. Yes, they were a little bit fluid on that, you're right. And then you could be adopted into that.
And then you
Cult.
were a part of that.
Yes.
Well, let me continue with 15. And what we have said is even more clear if another priest like Melchizedek appears, one who has become a priest not on the basis of a regulation as to his ancestry, but on the basis of the power of his indestructible life. For it is declared, you are a priest forever in the order of Melchizedek. The former regulation is set aside because it was weak and useless, for the law made nothing perfect, and a better hope is introduced by which we draw near to God. And it was not without an oath. Others became priests without an oath, but he became a priest with an oath when God said to him, the Lord has sworn and will not change his mind. You are a priest forever. Because of this oath, Jesus has become the guarantor of a better covenant. Now there have been many of these priests since death prevented them from continuing in office. But because Jesus lives forever, he has a permanent priesthood. Therefore, he is able to save completely those who come to God through him, because he always lives to intercede for them.
Well, the argument against having human priests.
Interesting.
Yeah, kind of.
Yeah.
Could be.
Well, say
There's
more.
only one
What
priest.
you hear? Yeah.
Well, it kind of sounds like there's only one priest, this person who lives on forever. And we don't need the human priests who just die. Okay. We just need them to follow Christ, but not to be the priest.
Because I can see that because there's been a rotation of priests and they
Yeah.
keep dying and things
Right.
keep getting
They're
messed up
human. Yeah.
and they're following the laws. But
So now we have the second Melchizedek
yeah,
named Christ or Jesus. Christ.
Mhm.
who like
Yeah.
Melchizedek remains a priest forever.
Forever.
Yes, yes. Yeah. I mean, they say Peter was the first, but he died. That would be the argument, yeah, that Peter was the first priest, human priest. I mean. Yeah. Well, this sort of answered my question. At the beginning, I was thinking, how does studying Melchizedek affect us today? Like, how does it tie into modern religion, I guess? But this sort of answers it right here. So
That's pretty good for Hebrews then.
yeah, yes, it is. So Hebrews, okay, because we don't really. In the UCC, we don't talk about a class of priests,
Right.
who you have to, who anoint things and that you give money to and things. Because they're done away with.
Yeah, I mean, and it's interesting as it goes on too. In 26, such a high priest truly
Yes.
meets our need, one who's holy, blameless, pure, set apart from sinners, exalted from the heavens. Unlike the other high priest,
Yes.
he does not need to offer sacrifices day after day.
No.
First for his own sins and then for the sins of the people. He sacrificed for their sins once for all when he offered himself. For the law appoints as high priests men in all their weakness, but the oath which came after the law appointed the Son who has been made perfect forever.
Yeah. And it like goes on. There's just a whole thing of this. He is.
So we've looked at it kind of like culturally a little bit, literary, comparing it. How about why is this letter in Hebrews? Why is it spending so much time talking about priests? Any thoughts? As far as why would the author have spent so much time on this?
Was there some confusion at the time?
But is he trying to
Oh, priest.
foreshadow a change? Like the old
Oh.
order is obsolete and the new order is Jesus?
That could be, yeah. Because he's saying that Jesus is
Priest.
he's the priest forever. So
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
And is he making a point of, I mean, like,
to turn away from the synagogues, and
yeah, and we
Yeah.
of course
say,
they're not
hey,
sacrificing in the synagogues at this time.
The,
They still have priests though
This
there's
is
still-
that were really highly looked upon. weren't they?
So this is written
mm,
before the destruction of the temple.
Hebrews,
Probably
yeah, I think before.
before the
Before,
destruction of the
yeah.
temple.
They were
Okay.
still going.
They were still going.
I think they were trying to clarify hierarchy, that it began with Melchizedek, ending with Jesus as the chief priest, the chief king, the king, our spiritual mentor and guide.
Big chief.
And in that respect, Jesus would be the priest, and all the rest of us are ministers following in that line, following his instructions, his teachings, living according to his footsteps in the sand. Because he made it very clear. Love God with everything you got and love everybody else.
Mhm.
Easy to say. And for some people,
Well,
This-
goodbye.
Bye,
Much
Anna.
love to
yeah,
all.
yeah. Have a nice evening. Yes, Hannah.
So we have this
This-
full circle occurring. Then
I'm sorry,
we have a full circle occurring here. So from the start of Abraham, it's not just that like a line that's happening, that the Bible's moving towards this, just moving towards Jesus or something, or the story, but it's actually a new creation that's occurring in the midst of this.
Mhm.
Not just new creation, like when we were talking about the tree of life, where at the beginning the Bible is really bookended by this tree of life. Well, we are
Mhm.
seeing priests too. We see Melchizedek, and then we see Jesus being compared to that, and it's like a whole new creation that's occurring, just
Mhm.
even in the foot as well, and
Mhm.
in the way that the whole hierarchy is being mixed up again. That we've started with this one, we've created this whole hierarchy that's gotten super complex, and then it's been wiped again and created it in a different way. As
Mhm. Sort of like going from kindergarten to senior year.
and then back to kindergarten again.
And then back to kindergarten, right?
Because then we learned everything we needed to know. We learned in kindergarten.
Well, actually, I had to repeat kindergarten.
I never got to go.
Oh, we lived in Syracuse, and I went when I was 4.5. I learned so much. And then we moved to a suburb, well, not a suburb, but a neighboring city. And they would not allow me to go to kindergarten. I had to wait till the next year when I was 5. And I hated it. But it was interesting.
Well, any questions as on tonight's?
lots. Like, is this gonna happen again?
Is it going to happen again? I think it happens again when people are progressing on their spiritual path, and they not only know verbally, even maybe by memorization, what Jesus was talking about and saying, but begin living the life that Jesus meant us to live. I think that comes to each and every one of us very individually. And if we continue to search, I think that's our new beginning. When we are open enough to be willing to change, to walk the path of Christ. I think that's where the rubber hits the road. And you don't want to fail that final exam. Although I think a loving God doesn't really give a darn. I think we are all loved constantly.
Where do you hear good news in the midst of this?
That Jesus is the high priest, Jesus is the king, Jesus is all loving, and Jesus has been the greatest teacher ever born. Jesus is reality for each of us if we choose to embrace his teachings in our hearts and minds and souls.
I hear some in comparing it to Melchizedek that Melchizedek's major role was to offer blessing.
Ah,
And that's like almost the sole task of Melchizedek was offer this blessing. And to have Jesus be compared to that in such a powerful way, I feel it uplifts that the most important piece of faith is offering blessing.
That's why I appreciate so much almost every benediction you give. You're saying you are blessed and you are meant to be a blessing to others. And that is so uplifting to hear, that's my mission today, to be a blessing to others, and tomorrow, and until we meet again next week.
Maybe we should update that song till we meet again next week.
Ah, yeah. Yeah, that is a great song. God be with you till we meet again. And actually, we probably should change it to God is with you till we meet again.
Yeah. Not a question that,
Yeah.
but that God is.
Mm-hmm.
Well, next week, we can continue in looking at priesthood with Moses and Aaron and David, and go deep into that. And if any point you guys are like, I'm so sick of talking about priests, then we'll go on to a different theme. But Moses, Aaron, and David are pretty important people. and we haven't talked about them as much lately because we've been more in Genesis lately and in the New Testament. So we're going to kind of jump into the middle next week and talk about them.
I have a question, and I haven't read enough to answer it myself, but I would like to also ask that we look for how Aaron was chosen to be the line from which priests came, because he's the one that built the golden calf. which I think was a huge transgression. So I'd like to explore that a little bit.
Yeah. Camille, have you ever known leaders to make mistakes?
Well, that answered that question. Just look at Congress. Look at our own legislature. Golly. Yeah. Yeah. Well, to lighten things up just a bit, I have one more question. Bernie, how many times are you going to play Santa Claus this year? I can't hear you.
I don't think at all.
Not at all. Well, then you ought to get
No,
yourself a red suit and just go sit out on
no.
a corner somewhere. You're going to meet lots of kids.
No, I've done once at work and that's about it. A long
Uh,
time ago.
uh,
So,
my husband had a beard that was a little bit longer and fuller and just silky. And he was sitting down on a picnic bench, and a little boy got up on the bench at one end and very slowly walked toward him. And Mark had to finally just look at him and say, "I'm not him, sweetheart."
Oh, that's
Oh
cute.
dear. But no, it sounds good for next week, Gretchen. And thank you so much for the work that you've done for this week. That was
Yeah.
a really good lesson.
Well, I'll see everybody next week.